This week on Supercars Talk, I wrap up the WD40 Phillip Island Supersprint. So this week I'll start off with a bit of an apology. On Saturday we saw an all New Zealand podium again. This time it wasn't the usual suspects. Andre Heimgartner in the Nissan having a great weekend, and he found himself in third place. I was probably a little bit critical of a couple of the other New Zealanders last time around, but a great effort from Andre, and I was surprised to see him the first Nissan. Rick had done a pretty good job. The other two were kind of in their usual position down the back. Now for the rest of the race, if you look at the results of McLaughlin and Coulthard out the front, it seemed pretty straightforward, which it was for them, but there was a fair bit happening behind them. We saw Slade and Courtney having synchronised blowouts down the main straight. Quite an interesting turn one for them, and we got to see some great slow-mos of the tyre eating the front guard of Courtney's car as he trundled back to the pits. They'll be ones that'll get replayed ad nauseum through the rest of the year, I think. But always great to see footage like that. It does look quite spectacular. We also got to see Whincup and Winterbottom losing wheels. Different reasons for them both. I'm not sure what was going on with Winterbottoms because they seem to have a loose rear wheel on the car, and they pitted, and then you would assume that they'd fix the problem, and then the wheel actually fell off. So he went three-wheeling back to the pits. For Whincup, car was quite clearly released before all the nuts were on. As he was driving off, the poor front right wheel gun guy was trying to chase the car down the pit lane, still trying to bolt the wheel on. We saw him limp around the track. Finally bringing it to a halt, actually causing a safety car, but luckily with the new rule this weekend with no pitting under the safety car, everyone had finished their pit stops at that point, so there was no effect. I was a little bit surprised that Winterbottom was the only one who seemed to pit under that safety car. Obviously you could pull in but not do your compulsory stop. I thought maybe some might have come in, bolted on some new tyres, have a fresh run at the end, because Phillip Island is quite a high degradation track, but we didn't see that happen. And of course the other one to lose a wheel was Cameron Waters in an ill attempted pass of Shane Van Gisbergen, and they touched wheels, and it was very surprising. It didn't seem like a big hit or anything, but it was enough to kind of rip the rear wheel out of the car, and then I was quite surprised that no one from the team kind of got onto the radio and told him to slow down. He seemed to be going back to the pits at quite an alarming rate considering the damage on the car, and it was quite clear that had he taken an extra 30 seconds or so to get back to the pits, that wouldn't have made much of a difference. They ended up retiring the car anyway because it was quite close to the end of the race and there was a lot of damage. Sunday we saw race 10 of the series, and quite a similar result, except this time the Penske cars were switched around, Coulthard taking the win. It seems during the pit stop sequence it seemed that the undercut wasn't working quite as well as normal. We saw Mostert in his first pit stop not change the tyres because they didn't think it was worthwhile. They thought he was better off staying out there on the warm tyres. Apparently also McLaughlin's pit lane speed limiter wasn't calibrated correctly. Might have had a problem with that a couple of years ago somewhere, not mentioning anywhere. But here it appears the speed was set too low, so it took him a lot longer to go down the pit lane than what it did for Coulthard. So Coulthard jumped him in the stops, and that basically set up the win for him. The only other big thing to note during the race probably was James Courtney in the wars again. First lap he punted off Todd Hazelwood, got himself a 15-second penalty for that, and then having two more tyre blowouts. quite interesting that it was just his car. Well, obviously Slade had the problem on Saturday, but Courtney, the only one on Sunday, to have two. Pye didn't have any issues. It's quite interesting. I'm not sure what's going on there at the old HRT. And of course on Sunday we got to see Anton on the podium for the first time. So it was great to see him up there, another new podium getter. And great for him to repay Erebus for taking a chance on him. It came out over the weekend that Betty was actually against signing him for the seat. But Alistair McFain and Barry Ryan, who are part of the team, they put their foot down and said, no, this is the right guy for the team. And he's finally starting to get some results. So the point score over the weekend, no surprises. We've got Scott McLaughlin in the lead on 1,058 points. Fabian Coulthard, second in line now, 124 points behind. And then Chaz Mostert jumps up to third, a whopping 243 points behind. Van Gisbergen kind of just hanging in there, 256 behind. And rounding out the top five is Dave Reynolds, 267 behind. Now, a bit of an issue there, I can see. Usually they say once you're a whole weekend, which is 300 points away, you start saying you're out of the championship hunt. And this early in the season, there's not many guys within that realm of 300 points to Scotty. And there's a few more that are nearly out of it as well. We only got to see one new livery this weekend. I was surprised. They swapped over the Percat livery again. 7-Eleven on the car. Great to see that brand. Also, probably not brands tipping in money, but new brands to the sport, really. We saw Coca-Cola, Barista Brothers and Powerade. There's probably a couple others that I forgot to mention. On the car, they're probably contra deals where, product placement, things like that in the 7-Eleven stores, but great to see things like that. Always good to see new sponsors on the cars. And speaking of new sponsors, we saw Kangan Institute on the windscreen banner of all four of the Kelly cars. Not sure if that's just for this round or whether that's an ongoing thing. So fingers crossed that that's for the rest of the season, because that's probably a decent financial investment into the team, which I think they desperately need now, right about now, after losing the Nissan money. And to round out this review, there's been a bit of talk about Jack LeBrock and his seat at Techno. Apparently they're not too happy with the young fella who's made some derogatory comments about the updates on the car, or lack of updates on the car. Apparently they're running around with kind of 2-year-old gear on the car, while everyone else has got the latest Triple 8 gear. Although after what we saw from Jamie over the weekend, maybe the latest Triple 8 gear isn't the stuff to have. But we've seen how Todd Hazelwood and Mark Winterbottom have jumped up the field this year, having proper equipment. Could also argue the engineering crew is probably lacking a bit, and I have heard some whispers from the Team 18 crew that some of the pit guys and that they're getting to share the pit boom. Obviously Techno and Team 18 share a pit boom, and you have to supply crew, but both teams have to supply crew for the pit stops. And apparently some of the Techno guys aren't quite up to speed with the Team 18 guys. Some rumours doing the rounds that Alex Rouleau's looking at that seat. He probably brings some funding with him, which I believe Jack LeBrock doesn't bring much funding. He brings a little but not much. And Alex Rouleau could probably bring some decent funding to that team. Possibly to pay for some updates, or possibly to pay for a better engineer or something like that. Also, another thing to consider is Truck Assist, their main sponsor. They've also just announced they're going to sponsor the Winton Supersprint, and they're also sponsoring the grid lineup part of the telecast. So if the sponsor was confident in the team, maybe they probably wouldn't be throwing money elsewhere. So it'll be interesting to see what happens over the rest of the year. So watch your space. I'll probably do a bit of a driver market update in the coming weeks, seeing as though we've now got a few week break before the Barbagallo round. So that wraps up the WD40 Supersprint review for me. Might take next week off, seeing as though it's Easter. I'm away for a few days, but I will have some content before the Barbagallo round. So I'll see you then.
Put away your inhibitions, let the beast in you just get loose. We all young, wild and